Welcome to our service for Sunday the 26th of December. We start with the carol, We Three Kings of Orient Are.
We three kings of Orient are, bearing gifts we traverse afar, field and fountain, moor and mountain, following yonder star. Oh, star of wonder, star of night, star with royal beauty bright, westward leading, still proceeding, guide us to thy perfect light. Born a king on Bethlehem's plain, gold I bring to crown him again. King forever, ceasing never, over us all to reign. Oh, star of wonder, star of night, star with royal beauty bright, westward leading, still proceeding, guide us to thy perfect light. Frankincense to offer have I, incense owns a deity nigh, prayer and praising, all men raising, worship him, God most high. Oh, star of wonder, star of night, star with royal beauty bright, westward leading, still proceeding, guide us to thy perfect light. Myrrh is mine, its bitter perfume, breeze of life, of gathering gloom, sorrow sighing, bleeding, dying, sealed in the stone cold tomb. Oh, star of wonder, star of night, star with royal beauty bright, westward leading, still proceeding, guide us to thy perfect light. Glorious now, behold him rise, King and God in sacrifice. Alleluia, alleluia, bird to Henry replies. Oh, star of wonder, star of night, star with royal beauty bright, westward leading, still proceeding, guide us to thy perfect light.
Our reading today is taken from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 2, reading from verses 1 to 23, hearing it from the Good News Bible. Jesus was born in the town of Bethlehem in Judea, during the time when Herod was king. Soon afterward, some men who studied the stars came from the east to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the baby born to be the King of the Jews? We saw his star when it came up in the east, and we have come to worship him." When King Herod heard about this, he was very upset, and so was everyone else in Jerusalem. He called together all the chief priests and the teachers of the law and asked them, "Where will the Messiah be born?" "In the town of Bethlehem in Judea," they answered, "for this is what the prophet wrote. Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, you are by no means the least of the leading cities of Judah, for from you will come a leader who will guide my people Israel." So Herod called the visitors from the east to a secret meeting and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem with these instructions: "Go and make a careful search for the child, and when you find him, let me know, so that I too may go and worship him." And so they left, and on their way they saw the same star they had seen in the east. When they saw it, how happy they were! What joy was theirs! It went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. They went into the house, and when they saw the child with his mother Mary, they knelt down and worshipped him. They brought out their gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, and presented them to him. Then they returned to their country by another road, since God had warned them in a dream not to go back to Herod. After they had left, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph and said, "Herod will be looking for the child in order to kill him. So get up, take the child and his mother, and escape to Egypt, and stay there until I tell you to leave." Joseph got up, took the child and his mother, and left during the night for Egypt, where he stayed until Herod died. This was done to make come true what the Lord had said through the prophet, "I called my son out of Egypt." When Herod realized that the visitors from the east had tricked him, he was furious. He gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its neighborhood who were 2 years old and younger. This was done in accordance with what he had learnt from the visitors about the time when the star had appeared. In this way, what the prophet Jeremiah had said came true. "A sound is heard in Ramah, the sound of bitter weeping. Rachel is crying for her children. She refuses to be comforted, for they are dead." After Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and go back to the land of Israel, because those who tried to kill the child are dead." So Joseph got up, took the child and his mother, and went back to Israel. But when Joseph heard that Archelaus had succeeded his father Herod as king of Judea, he was afraid to go there. He was given more instructions in a dream, so he went to the province of Galilee and made his home in a town named Nazareth. And so what the prophets had said came true: he will be called a Nazarene. Jesus was born into our world. Sometimes we almost lose sight of that fact in the midst of the sentimentalized overlay of stories and Christmas card scenes that cluster around the Bible's words on his birth. But if there were events of wonder and mystery gathered around his birth, the harsh world into which he had been born soon made its presence felt. The times into which Jesus was born was a time of turmoil as far as Palestine was concerned. The wider picture was of much greater stability and prosperity. Jesus was born when Caesar Augustus was Roman emperor. Augustus was the adopted son of Julius Caesar and was in fact the first Roman emperor, having replaced the great Roman Republic of his father with an empire of which he was head. More than any other ruler, Augustus raised the expectations of what a leader could accomplish and what a society could achieve. He sought to use religion as a glue to cement the whole empire together, and declared his dead adoptive father to be divine and himself a son of God. He established appropriate rites of worship. His enlightened and stable regime, many believed, would last forever, a final solution to the problem of government. And yet 2,000 years on, we know that his proud empire passed away. And for most of us, our knowledge of Caesar Augustus doesn't extend much beyond an awareness that he ruled at a time a certain baby, Jesus, was born in an obscure corner of his realm, and that he ordered a census to be taken throughout the empire. The situation, however, in Palestine was much more turbulent. When Jesus was born, Herod the Great was coming to the end of his long reign. In any manner of speaking, Herod's accomplishments were remarkable. He rose from relative obscurity to become king of Palestine, and remained as king for 42 years during a very volatile period. A lot had to do with his own strengths and talents. He was very astute at working with his Roman masters and keeping in with them. Cunning and ruthless as he was, they knew that they could depend on him to keep order in that corner of their vast empire. He also furthered the emperor's cultural policy by his vast building enterprises. Old cities were revitalized and new cities were built. Temples, hippodromes and amphitheatres were constructed, not only in his own realm, but in foreign cities as well. His crowning achievement was the reconstruction of the Jewish temple, which was ranked among the world's wonders of that day. But ultimately, Herod failed in what really mattered. He became insecure and suspicious of both friends and enemies. He had 10 wives during his life and 15 children, which was hardly a recipe for marital and family peace. He readily killed any he saw as a threat to his power. He had 3 sons of his killed. He had even his favourite wife, Mariamne, killed when he suspected her of plotting an intrigue. His family life was so bad that Caesar Augustus is reputed to have said, "I would rather be Herod's pig than his son." Many of the people were angry at the way Herod had fraternized with the Romans to his own advantage, and felt he had compromised the Jewish religion. And in the final year of his life, when disease was ravaging his body, 2 popular religious leaders gathered together a band of young men whom they influenced to stand up for the purity of their religion. Herod had placed a large statue of an imperial golden eagle over the great gate into the temple, which they saw as an unlawful image, and these men encouraged the young men to destroy it. When word spread that Herod was dying, they boldly went out at midday in front of the crowds and let themselves down from the top of the temple by rope, cutting the statue down. Soldiers quickly arrived on the scene and arrested 40 of the culprits. Herod rallied from his impending death and had the 2 religious leaders and the men who had cut down the eagle burnt alive. The rest of the men he had executed. When he was about to die, he was so concerned that nobody would mourn him that he ordered all the key leaders of Israel to the hippodrome, where he had them shut in. And he gave orders that at the moment of his death, all of them should be killed, so that there would be mourning at his funeral. Mercifully, those whom he asked to do this ignored his request, when he did die, and set the men free. Herod left a will in which he divided his kingdom between 3 of his sons, subject to the approval of the emperor. To Archelaus he left the kingship of the most important part of his kingdom centered on Jerusalem. To Antipas he left Galilee and southern Transjordan. Herod Antipas appears in the Gospels a number of times, most notably for executing John the Baptist, and again at the time of Jesus' crucifixion. And to Philip he left the territory northeast of the Sea of Galilee. Archelaus got off to a bad start. Some saw him as a soft touch after his ruthless father and sought to take advantage of him before he had become established in power. They asked him to release men his father had imprisoned and lower their taxes, which he did. Then some tried to push him further by calling for a proper period of mourning for those killed by his father in the eagle incident, and for a replacement of the high priest by a more acceptable man, and punishment of some of Herod's henchmen. These he agreed to, as he wanted to keep the peace before he went to Rome to have his position confirmed by the emperor. But he warned them not to push him any further. He sent his general and others to remonstrate with those who had gathered together in the temple. But they were mistreated, and the people would not listen to them. And when the time of Passover came, and large numbers gathered in Jerusalem, the troublemakers caused a loud mourning and wailing to break out in the temple for their martyred compatriots, until in alarm that things were getting out of hand, Archelaus sent in a regiment of soldiers. The rioters stoned the soldiers and caused them to retreat, whereupon Archelaus sent in the whole army, killing 3,000 men, and causing many more to flee for their lives to the hills. He then set out for Rome, where, despite opposition from Jewish enemies and his own family, he was confirmed in his position by Augustus. While he and his brother Herod Antipas were in Rome, further riots and uprisings broke out in Palestine. One of these centered on Sepphoris in Galilee, just a few miles from Nazareth, where Judas, son of the notorious brigand chief Hezekiah, whom Herod had executed 45 years before, seized weapons and armed his followers. So serious were these risings that Quintilius Varus, imperial legate of Syria, intervened to put them down. And he made a stern example of the leaders, 2,000 of whom were crucified alongside the roads, in order to warn the population that revolts in Rome's sphere of influence would not be tolerated. And only a few years later, Archelaus was stripped of his kingship by the Romans after further Jewish unrest, and banished to Gaul. And the Romans imposed direct rule on Judea through governors, of whom Pontius Pilate is the best known. This was the world into which Jesus was born, during the dying days of Herod's reign. The joy and wonder of the events that had attended his birth must soon have been tempered with a realism brought on by pain and suffering. At Jesus' presentation in the temple when he was a few weeks old, these events began to cast their shadow. Simeon rejoiced before God, "With my own eyes I have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the presence of all peoples, a light to reveal your will to the Gentiles, and to bring glory to your people Israel." But then he went on to say, "This child is chosen by God for the destruction and salvation of many in Israel. He will be a sign from God, which many people will speak against, and so reveal their secret thoughts. And sorrow, like a sharp sword, will break your own heart." and within days that sorrow began to break upon them as Herod began his newest campaign of terror. Secular history doesn't mention the murder of the innocents in Bethlehem, but no one acquainted with the life of Herod the Great can have any doubt that he was capable of such a massacre. Bethlehem was only a small town, and the murder of its youngest inhabitants would have been hardly worth a mention alongside the shed blood of his many other victims. Scarcely a day passed, in fact, without an execution under Herod's regime. The political climate of the time, at the time of Jesus' birth, resembled that of Russia in the 1930s under Stalin. Citizens couldn't gather in public meetings. Spies were everywhere. No one acquainted with Herod would have believed for a moment his smooth words to the wise men about wishing to go and worship this baby born to be the King of the Jews. His deep insecurity made him crack down on anybody he saw as a threat to his power. And so the angel appeared to Joseph in a dream, warning him to take his family and flee to Egypt. And thus Jesus spent his infancy living as a refugee in Egypt. Even when an angel of the Lord appeared again to Joseph in a dream and gave him the all-clear to return to Israel, political events still cast their shadow over the three of them. Herod the Great had gone the way of the world. Death had claimed him. But Matthew tells us that when Joseph heard that Archelaus had succeeded his father Herod as king of Judea, he was afraid to go there and was guided instead to Galilee, to make his home in Nazareth, in the relative quiet of the northern province, away from the centre of things around Jerusalem and Bethlehem. Though no doubt Jesus would have grown up hearing of the ruthless manner in which Varus had quelled the uprising a few miles away in Sepphoris. Jesus shattered many expectations in the way he came to this world. He did not come in power to sweep away the unjust kingdoms of this world. He came in vulnerability into the midst of them, to experience the suffering of situations sadly still all too common in our own day. He did not rise to political power or to a position of wealth, but came with the wisdom of a simple message to love the Lord with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and to love your neighbour as yourself. He came with a message of forgiveness of sins and to set people free from their burdens and their sins. And then in love, he died for that world he came to save. Herod failed to dispose of him at his birth. At the end of his earthly life, Herod's son, Herod Antipas, ruler of Galilee, got together with his enemy, Pontius Pilate, who ruled at that time over the southern province around Jerusalem, intending to put away for good the Jesus who was a thorn in their flesh. They thought they had succeeded, but they had not reckoned with the power of God and the power of the Spirit working in Jesus' followers. It occurred to no one at that time that his stubborn followers might outlast the Roman Empire. And yet, other kingdoms have come and gone, but his kingdom will never pass away. Kingdoms have come and gone, but some things have never changed. The land of his birth still experiences violence and oppression. Refugees still crowd our world. Innocent children still lose their lives. And yet, something has changed. We have a risen Saviour who experienced so many injustices in his earthly life, and who now dwells in our midst and stands with all who suffer injustice and oppression in our own time. His kingdom of justice and love will never die and is growing in our midst. Beside the powerful kingdoms of the world in each passing age, it can seem a weak and ineffectual thing. But it is an eternal kingdom which will never pass away, and to oppose it and throw in our lot with any other kingdom leads in the end to death and destruction. Jesus came to seek and to save the lost. That is all of us until we have thrown in our lot with the Prince of Peace. As we stand on the threshold of a new year, may we put our lives in God's hands and dedicate ourselves afresh to work for God's eternal kingdom. Following that path may result in us facing times of challenge and difficulty, but the end results will be a place in God's everlasting kingdom of light and love. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness will never put it out. May the light of the glorious gospel of Christ shine in our hearts, transform our lives, and bring light to the world. And the blessing of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit be with you all, now and for evermore. Amen.